Hey guys, welcome to this part of our faith path entitled What is Faith and Why Do We Need It? It's a little bit of an introduction or an overview of kind of how I want to position this entire path that we're going to go down because the path is going to talk about a lot of specifics of, of how faith interacts with our areas of life. We talk about the clinical area, how we feel, our relationships, and our performance in reaching our dreams and goals because faith is a part of all of that. But I wanted to kind of segment it out a little bit to talk specifically, even though faith is involved in all of what we do on the areas of boundaries like me, I want to focus, just do a micro downburst, if you will, just a closer in view of faith itself and kind of how I think about it. Sort of like, Henry Sunday School. So let's start out by defining what we mean by faith. I like the definition that the Bible gives for itself. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1, it says this: faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we don't see. Let me say that again. Faith is basically having confidence in something we can't see. I mean, it's like, gravity. You can't see gravity, but you certainly have faith in it. You have faith in it when you toss a wad of paper into a paper basket. That's faith in gravity. You can't see it. You turn on the microwave, you hit a button, you can't see the microwaves, but you are sure, even though you can't see them, you're sure that they work, right? Well, when the Bible talks about having faith, it's not just, oh, I have faith. I talk to people about their spiritual lives, or I ask them about faith or whatever. They go, well, I don't like institutionalized religion, or I'm not very religious, but I'm spiritual. I'm a spiritual person. Well, that's great, but what does that mean? Sometimes people don't really, some people have very developed answers for that, very sophisticated answers, but other times they say, I'm spiritual. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's a lot of things that can mean, but in this instance, what we're talking about is faith as an object. Okay, it's not microwaves and it's not gravity; it's God, and that's where I wanted to start out with because basically the essence of faith, in the way that I see it, and the way I think about it, in terms of what you and I are doing, which is we're working on life and how to make it better. Faith is the assurance and confidence, basically, in God, in a person. And the faith is the mechanism by which we make the connection with that person called God. Very similar to the way a baby connects with a mother. And through that connection, through that exercising what psychologists call basic trust, the first thing a human has to learn in relationship to becoming a human, a baby's got to develop basic trust, which develops a secure attachment. And from that attachment, they begin to get a lot of things that make them grow. Same thing with God. That the faith is the exercise of I'm going to trust this person. And through exercising trust in this person, which requires an action on my part, right? Sort of like the book of James says, faith without works is dead. Well, if I trust, say, yeah, I trust the parachutes. Well, I don't. I might say I trust it, but it doesn't do me any good till I pull the ripcord and really trust it, right? That's when I get the benefit of it. Well, when we say we believe in God or have faith in God, it really begins to benefit us when we exercise that faith and begin to depend on and follow and connect with God in very, very real ways. That's what I mean by faith. So what it is this conviction in the confidence in this person that we cannot see, that he's just as real as other things that we can see, or even other things we can't see. And through exercising that faith, we have a trust in him that establishes a connection. And that connection is everything when it comes to our improving our lives. Because just like when a baby connects, they come to, the Bible talks about hell being, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, you want to see a picture of hell, look at a baby. As soon as they're born, they're not connected. They're alone in the universe without love. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then what happens is the baby's brought to the breast and they're connected with and they're fed, and that connection happens and life begins to get poured into them. That's what we're talking about. And we need connections with people, as you hear me talk about all the time. And God also designed us. Not only do we need connections with people, that's part of how we connect with Him is through people. We also need the connection directly with Him. So what that does is it reverses the whole problem of a fallen earth. Right? The Bible tells a story that we were born connected to God and He supplied us with all this stuff. And then we ran away from Him and became orphans. And now He calls us back into a relationship. And when we connect with Him, we're establishing trust. And it's like plugging the electric cord into the socket or connecting your phone to the network or connecting your computer to the Wi-Fi. Now there's a connection. And through that connection, life can be put into us from the outside in order to get better. And that's what it is, and that's why we need it. Now, in the next section, we'll go through a few of the specifics of what that actually does for us. Okay, so we started by saying faith is this assurance, this trust, this connection with God. Sort of like a baby makes a connection with the mom or the caretaker. Well, that's good, right? We're not alone anymore. Oh, but it's way more than that. Think about what you get in that connection. You get all sorts of goodies. You get food. Think about this. Here's a list, just a quick list. What do we get from a connection with mom, for example, or with dad, with a parent, with a caretaker? Well, we get security, right? We get love. We're grounded now. We have a secure attachment. We get wisdom. We get know-how. We get intelligence. They teach us how to do stuff. They stand up for us. And if we're afraid of the dark, we have somebody, to hold on to and know things are secure. We actually get provision. I need food. Okay, here's a sandwich. Or we need to learn how to drive. Okay, I'm going to get your permit and I'm going to take you to show you how this works. Then we fall down. We need somebody to pick us up and run home and cry to, and we need to have our heart comforted. Or we really screw up and we feel bad and we need forgiveness. Or we just want somebody to go with us. I don't want to go through this alone. And sometimes I need counsel. Sometimes I need correction. Well, that's what a good relationship with a parent provides. Well, what a relationship with God provides. And if we went through the Bible, and I could go through the whole thing, it's insane. All the things that God provides for us, and I can tell you over decades of walking with Him, right, and staying connected to Him, I can tell you He provides all those things. I can tell you story after story of literal supernatural interventions as well as natural ones where I've needed all those things. I've been alone and He showed up and was with me or sent somebody to be with me exactly the way I needed, or I needed an answer, got direction or guidance or whatever it is. God provides all these things, but only when we're in a relationship. Now, in addition to all of that, which is a pretty good list of what God gives us in a relationship to be stronger, in what we're talking about in Boundaries on Me, obviously we're looking at a lot of things that help us thrive. But we're also broken. We also need healing. And we also need strengthening. And it is amazing when you look at the elements that go into getting well in emotional struggles or making a relationship get well. all the provisions that God brings and guides and works through that we need in order to get well, which includes, connecting to a community with wisdom that teaches us his wisdom and his ways, that guides us in how to reconcile things, how to get over depression, anxiety, addictions, and all that, as well as the strength that he gives us and the power that he gives us and the forgiveness that all of those elements. That's why we need this thing called faith. And in this path, we're going to go into a lot of the specifics of this. But what I wanted to start with was back in the first section, what did I say? It begins with the trust in the relationship and not just a vague spirituality, but me and God. God is a real person that I can't see, an assurance that he's really there, and an exercising that faith by reaching out and connecting with him. And then through that connection, beginning to ask and experience all those things that I just listed and more. So we gotta believe, and all it takes is a little bit. A baby doesn't know. Baby doesn't know its mother's social security number. Doesn't have a lot of information. Doesn't have her address. But takes that first little step just to reach out. That's where it starts. And as we continue, then it gets stronger, and then we begin to get these specifics, and that's how it helps us. Okay. In the next section, I'm going to put that into some categories for you to show you how a relationship with God gets us back from upside down to right side up in some key categories of life. So to wrap up just this intro of what is faith and why do we need it, one of the ways I like to think about this is that there is a design to life. Okay? The Bible says that in the beginning, God created the earth, created the universe, and then he created us, and then he breathed life into us, right? So that's the way it all started. And when he set it up that way, there was a particular order to things. And then the Bible says, well, yeah, we don't like really being under God. I'm gonna blow off God, and I'm gonna become an atheist or an agnostic or a I don't care person, and I'm gonna live life on my own apart from God. In other words, we rejected him, right? And when we did that, what happened was all these essential categories of life that God played this role and we played this role, they got turned upside down, and we tried to be our own gods. Now that ends up in a lot of pain and brokenness. And what the next part of the story is about, and where we live today, is that God came back to the earth that he created that rejected him. When Jesus came to earth, he said, hey, let's flip this thing back around like it ought to be, and let's get it working in the right way. And that's what we call salvation. It's the healing, the reconciling of everything that went wrong, and then life can work again. So let's look at what those big categories are that we have to pay attention to in order for all of this stuff to work in the best way. Okay? Number one, when God created us, God was the source of life. But when we run away from God and we're not depending on him, we try to become the source of our life. And we have to operate on our own. We're not plugged in anymore. So we run out of strength, and we run out of courage, and we run out of power, and we run out of connection, and we're alone. We have to kind of like do life by ourselves in the universe. That's not good. We weren't made to be the source of life. We're supposed to depend on God to give us what we need. Number two, when God designed it, God was the boss. He said, look, here's how it works. And we salute him, and things go okay, right? You get to play in the garden and eat of all these different trees, and you can play golf and go fishing, and all this kind of stuff. But just don't eat of that one tree. What did he say? Don't eat of the tree of becoming God, acting like you're God, like you're going to be like the Most High. That was the original temptation, that you could be like God and know good from evil, right? He is the judge. Well, what we did was we decided to play God. So now we're going to be the boss of our lives. We try to run our lives on our own, thinking we know best, and we make up all the kind of how life works, and we don't obey anybody. We never ask God if something's okay or say we're sorry if we screwed up. We just kind of like are our own boss, and that ends up in chaos or down some path that doesn't work. But when we come back into a relationship, now we're depending on Him, and we're also saying, God, if you say do it this way, I'm going to do that by faith. If you say that it's good for my mental health to forgive somebody, then I'm going to obey that, even when I don't feel like it. If you're saying it's good for me to approach somebody and work out a conflict and have some boundaries and whatever I need to do, and I don't feel like it, I'm still gonna do it because you told me to. That leads to incredible growth when we begin to obey the right thing. It's sort of like you have a coach, right? Your coach says do it this way, and we go, I don't like to do it. Well, do it that way, and things work better. So that's the second thing. He's our boss, and we obey him. Thirdly, God was in control of the universe, and we weren't supposed to be in control of it. And then we decided to play God, and we're going to try to control other people and outcomes and all this. And we turn to control freaks, and now along the way, we lose control of ourselves. Well, when we come back into a relationship with God, we flip it back to the way it's supposed to be, and we yield to God's control, and we take control of ourselves. Self-control. That's what boundaries are all about. Self-control. It's like the serenity prayer. The most out of control person is an addict, right? And to get well, what do? This very thing. They say, God, help me to change the things I can change, take control of the things I have control of, to surrender the things I don't have control of or can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So when we come back into a relationship with God like it was designed to be, we depend on Him as a source, we obey Him and do what He says, we yield to His control and surrender things that we don't have control of. And then fourthly, we no longer try to play judge. See, God said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We're not smart enough to judge each other and judge people and judge ourselves. But then when we started playing God, we turned into critical judge monsters. And now we're judgmental with each other. We're judgmental with ourselves. And when we're judging ourselves, we can never perform well. We can't overcome depression, can't overcome anxiety, can't overcome relationships when we're judgmental or we're afraid of being judged by others. But then when we come back to a relationship with God and He says, what? Judge not. Don't judge each other. Give that up. Let me be the judge. You don't judge life. You just experience your life. And you try to do the obedience thing and do it the best you can. But don't get judgmental of each other and critical when you make a mistake. Judgmentalism is never going to help us. And we come back into a relationship with God. We give up judgment. And then we're not judged anymore. We're forgiven. And then lastly, God made the rules. He was the designer, right? And I said earlier, we obey Him. What do we obey? We obey the rules that He set up. Oh my gosh. What happens if you don't obey the rules? If you get a car and it says put oil in it and you don't obey that, your car's not going to work. Well, God has some pretty good ideas about how life works. He talks about connecting. He talks about having boundaries. He talks about forgiving. He talks about using your talents. He talks about a bunch of stuff. He knows how this is supposed to work. And when we come into a relationship with Him, that's what studying the scriptures is about. Learning His ways, His rules, if you will, His ways, His design. What are the rules of physics? The laws of physics, the laws of God. If you're going to build a plane, build it according to the rules so it can stay in the air. Our lives are the same way. So those are some categories that as we go through this, I'm going to ask you to depend on God, lean on Him, ask for His help. When He says do something, have some faith that that's a good thing to do and obey Him. When He says surrender stuff to Him that you can't control, but then get in control and start to respond to life instead of being so reactionary, we get in a lot better mental health. And if we stop judging ourselves and judging other people, we have much better relationships and we have much better performance. And then if we begin to learn his ways and the way life works and keep those ways and operate according to those ways, wellness, thriving, and a bunch of stuff comes together. So that's kind of how broadly what is faith? It's believing in him, coming to a relationship with him through a connection. We can have all those benefits, and we get those benefits by doing the things that we were designed to do, like depending and obeying and yielding and experiencing instead of judging and keeping his ways. When we do all that, all this stuff takes us to a whole another level. And as we go through this path, that's what we're going to be looking at.
The design of life. What is faith, and why do we need it? When God created us, He was the source of life. But when we run away from God, we try to become the source. We run out of strength and power. We are alone. We have to do life by ourselves in the universe. We were not made to be the source of life. When we live according to the design laid out by God, it takes us to a whole other level. If faith is having even a little bit of assurance that God is there to connect with, where would you say that you are today on your exercise of faith? Where do you think you are in the 5 areas that were discussed? Seeing God as a source of everything you need, obeying the things that He tells you to do, surrendering control of things that you can't control, letting go of judgment of yourself and others, seeking to understand His ways and designs in the areas that you need to.
Welcome to this next segment in our path on faith. And this is, I mean, you got to kind of almost say it's one of your favorite topics because it's the one that everything else rests upon. And that is the topic of grace. So I wanted to spend a little time just talking about what is grace because I find that there is a big misunderstanding, or I would say maybe not misunderstanding, but lack of a full understanding about what grace actually is. Now, I just want you to think about that word for a second. You know, if you ask the kind of average Christian on the street, tell me about grace. What is grace? What they'll probably say is something like, well, it means that God unconditionally accepts me. It's his unconditional love for me, right? Well, that's true, but that's not really all of what it is. It's actually a manifestation of what grace is, because grace is way bigger than that. And I'll get into that in a second. But another thing you'll hear a lot is people kind of think that grace is sort of the absence of standards. Like we hold people to standards, but if you give me grace, I don't need to worry about all that stuff, right? And I remember a young man that I was asked to meet with one time about some performance issues in his work. And he said, well, the problems with my leadership, you know, I don't do well under a legalistic leader. I need a more grace oriented leader. And I said, your leader is legalistic? And he says, yeah, he's really, he says, I said, well, what is he legalistic about? He says, well, every week he's got to, he says, I have to turn in reports of how many people I called on and all this kind of stuff. And I said, you call that legalism? And he says, yeah. I said, legalism would be if he told you you're going to hell if you don't do that. That's legalism. All that is, sounds like to me, is a job description and a job requirement. See, a lot of people think that grace is the absence of any kinds of requirements or any kinds of standards. Like, I'm going to give you grace for that, meaning you kind of don't have to show up. Well, really, that's not what grace is either. Let me define grace for you in the theological way of historically looking at this. It's defined by two words: unmerited favor. Unmerited favor. Now, unmerited means I can't earn it. When God loves me, and when He loves you, and when He accepts us, and even when He initiates that, see, unmerited means I don't even initiate it. One of my favorite verses is in the Bible. It says, while we were still enemies of God, we had blown Him off. He initiated the relationship. We didn't even talk Him into it. He came to us. Unmerited means we can't produce anything to get all of this stuff. And what is the stuff? The second word, favor. Grace is unmerited favor. Basically, it starts with favor means somebody is for you, not against you. They give you favor. When a baby is born, I saw this on TV the other night where the baby is born and the doctor, delivers the baby and wraps him up and turns and puts the baby in the mother's arms. That baby's not doing a lot to qualify for that mother's love that's already there. See, grace is unmerited favor. God is for you without you doing anything. And even past that, when you've done things that He wouldn't even like, or you've done things to Him. Unmerited, we can't do anything to deserve it, and favor means He's for us. Good things. So, what does that look like? Well, I'll never forget this story. A man came to me one time who was the chairman of the board of a ministry, and the president of the ministry said was having some problems, and he'd like to kind of get my thoughts on how to help him. And I said, well, what's happened? And he said, well, he's gained about 150 pounds, and we're really worried about his health. He's in his 40s. The doctors say his numbers are bad. His father died of a heart attack in his 40s, and his joints are beginning to get. He's near becoming diabetic. He said it's really bad. We're really worried about it. And I said, well, what have you done? He said, well, I've become his accountability partner. And I said, what do you mean accountability? What are you doing? He said, well, I hold him accountable. And I said, well, what does that look like? And he said, well, I hold him accountable. Every week I hold him accountable. And I said, accountable to what? And he says, to his diet and his exercise. The program the doctor put him on to go on a diet and do his exercise. And every week we get together and I hold him accountable. I said, how's it going? He said, well, not so good. I said, is he doing it? He says, well, kind of, sort of, not really, kind of, but not really. I said, well, is it working? He said, no, he's gained weight. I said, how long have you been doing this? He said, about 6 months. And I said, so on your accountability program, he's gaining weight. And now tell me, what else are you doing in this accountability program? And he said, well, that's what I do. I hold him accountable. And I said, but he's not doing it. And he said, right. And I said, and when he doesn't do it, then what do you do? He said, well, I hold him accountable. And I said, but then what do you do when you hold him accountable to make it work? He said, well, I hold him accountable. And I said, well, the next week when he doesn't do it, what do you do? He said, well, I hold him accountable. And I thought for a second, and I said, you better tell him you're not going to hold him accountable anymore. He said, why not? And I said, because you're going to kill him. This isn't going to work. It's only going to get worse if that's the program. He said, well, why not? He's got a diet and exercise program, and I'm holding him accountable, but why would that not be a good program? And I said, because there's no grace there. He said, what are you talking about? No, you don't understand. He said, I give him lots of grace. I don't condemn him, and I'm not on his case, and I don't shame him. I encourage him, but there's lots of grace for him. I said, I understand that there's those maybe expressions of grace and that there's no punishment and you're not on his case. I said, but grace is much more than that. Grace is unmerited favor, which means that you would be bringing him favors, good things that he can't produce, that would enable him, empower him to reach the standard. See, grace doesn't take standards away. Grace comes down to where we are and helps empower us to be able to meet the standard. Now, what is in the program that looks like that? And he said, well, I don't know. I'm just holding him accountable. I said, exactly. So what would empower him to be different next week than he was last week? He said, well, what would that look like? I said, well, he's probably not eating, or he's probably eating not for no reason, right? I said, in the last few years, has he had any things happen to him when he's gained all this weight? Any traumas or any losses? He says, oh my gosh, he's been through so much. And he told me 4 deaths the guy had in his immediate family and circles, and another, several different losses. I said, so where's he processing all that grief? He said, what do you mean? I said, is he in a grief group? Does he have a therapist where this guy's sitting on a lot of pain? He said, no. And I said, well, let's put that in the program. And then I said, you said he's the president. He's kind of the CEO. He's running things. How did he get to be the president? He said, well, we promoted him. Before he was the COO. And I said, well, now he's kind of the president dash CEO. Where did he get the E? He said, what do you mean? I said, he was the COO. Where did he get the E? The CEO. He said, we promoted him. I said, you promoted him, but where did he get the capacity to pull that off? See, that's a particular set of capabilities. Where did you build that into it? He said, well, we really just, I said, he's probably overwhelmed with his job and has a lot of stress. That's probably part of this picture. I said, there's a number of things here that, why don't we get him a CEO coach? And so we put that on the, long story short, we built in some things that would be unmerited, like he can't produce this stuff. They're favors that we're bringing to him. And see, now what that's going to do is it's going to, I said, for example, another thing he doesn't have the structure and the discipline, the self-discipline to even work the program you've already given him, the diet and exercise. He says, you're right. He doesn't have self-discipline. That's what I'm going to tell him. He needs to get some self-discipline. I go, which self is he going to get this from? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you say he's got to have some self-discipline, but we just talked about this guy's self doesn't have any discipline. So where's this self-discipline? It's like telling a car with no gas to give it some self-gas. I said, self-discipline is a fruit of other discipline. So what we've got to do, unmerited favor, we've got to bring to him the discipline that he doesn't possess. Remember, unmerited? He doesn't have it in him. So does he have 4 or 5 friends that are healthy and in shape? And he goes, yeah, we got a good team. I said, so Tom knocks on his door on Monday at noon and says, come on, we're going for a 45-minute walk. Joey shows up on Tuesday, said, we're going for a bike ride. Somebody else says, we're going, they've got the discipline and structure, so they're going to provide it to him, and then he's going to do what? See, that's grace. What does he have to do? Obey grace. That is a different deal. See, when we're trying to reach a standard of performance, like God says you got to meet these, keep these 10 commandments. Well, who can do that, right? Or you got to be a good parent, or you got to be, and we can, or you got to stop that addiction. We can't. We love it that God has grace and He accepts me in my failure. The absence of condemnation, that's grace. The absence of punishment, that's grace. The unconditional love and acceptance, that's grace. But that doesn't make us better. It just accepts us where we are. But God loves you much more than that. He wants to give you the things that you need that will strengthen you and mature you and make you able to reach the standard. That's what we all want to do. Grace only has meaning in relation to standards. Otherwise, it would, we need that word, right? And so when we're talking about grace, the first thing I want you to understand is you can't earn it. You can't screw it up. He comes to you with unconditional acceptance, unconditional love. But just like a good parent, it's way more than just love. It's empowerment. It's giving you the nutrients. These trees out here, how do they grow? Grace. The tree can't produce what it needs in order to grow. It can reach for the heavens when it takes in the grace from the outside of the favor of the rain and the soil and the nutrients that's provided it, and then it reaches and meets the standard. See, you and I are like that. I'll never forget, I've told this story probably on another lesson, I bet. My daughter Lucy, when she was about 6 years old, 7 years old-ish, and she was, starting to work math problems. And I remember, her grade, she wasn't getting good marks in math. And I was a little worried about her. I said, Lucy, you got to, and I'm thinking, well, she's kind of lazy. She's not doing her math homework. I'm going to make sure she's doing it. And so I said, I'm going to sit with you. Have you done your homework? She says, well, kind of that thing. And I said, well, I want you to finish it before you go play or go to bed tonight. And she says, well. And so she comes down. It's kind of half done. I said, Lucy, that's not okay. Okay, sit down. You're going to sit here. I'm going to sit with you until you finish this. I'm going to read a book and you do your math. And she's going, I'm too tired. I said, Lisa, I got all night. We're not going anywhere. I've got all night. You're going to finish one. And I said, Liz, I don't think you're understanding me. We're not moving. I want to go to bed. We're not moving till you get it done. So I'm thinking she just needs some boundaries, right? She just needs some discipline. Well, she starts working her math problems, and the answers are just screwy, and they're wrong. And so I said, Liz, let me watch how you do this. No, I'm going to watch how you do this. And so she starts to work, and I notice that as she's working these either division or multiplication or something, and every now and then she would do this little move like that, and I watched her, and I watched her. Every little flinch, every quick move involved a six, and it occurred to me, and I asked her, Lizzie, what's 6 times 4? She didn't know. What's 6 times 7? She didn't know. What's 5 times 7? 35. What's 5 times 4? 20. So now she didn't know her sixes. And every time she would come to a six, she would just write something down. Anxiety, just impulse. Of course it's going to be wrong. See, I could have held her to the standard and just had boundaries and made her do her homework, or held her to standard grades, and when she flunks out, then, discipline her more. God understands we don't have it in us to meet the standard. That's why grace has got to come down to where we are, and I stopped. Sorry. I said, Lucy, let's not do homework tonight. It's okay. Tell you what, tomorrow, instead of doing homework, we're going to play a game. She says, okay. So she goes to bed. The next day, we played flashcard games on her sixes. She learned her sixes. No problems with math anymore, meeting the standard, but it took grace. But it took more than just, I'm not going to hold you to a standard, or I'm going to forgive you for never knowing math for the rest of your life and just accept you. It was all of that. I'm going to accept you. No punishment. No, you're not going to time out for not getting the right answer or any of this stuff. But you need grace. You need unmerited favor. You need for me to come down to the level of failure and not only accept you and not condemn you, but help you get better. That's the full picture of God's grace. When He gives us, and He does give us, and He will give us what we need to meet the standard. And we're always trying to obey the standard, but we fail. See, here's the thing about grace. All we got to do, what He says, is obey His grace. His grace begins with obeying His unconditional love and acceptance. We go, okay. It's like the baby. Okay, Mom, when the arms are there, they come first, and the baby goes to the breast and starts to take in. That's obedience to grace. Pretty good deal, because it comes out of total inability. It's just taking in what's given to them. And as we do that and we obey the help that's provided, and when we, just take it in and use it, that strengthens us. So that's what grace is. First of all, there's no condemnation for being who you are. There's total acceptance. Of course there is. He moves towards you. You can't earn it. He started the process. He's the one that called you. That's what the Bible says. Nobody seeks Him. If you're seeking Him, it's because He sought you first. and is quickening that desire, that interest you have in God ever, or the interest you have in forgiveness, that always starts with Him. And that's the security of the message. There's no such thing as a person wanting God that God won't accept. The wanting, He initiated. He woke us up and initiates us and says, come to me. And He says, of course I'll accept you. I'm the one that called you into this. But then once we have that no condemnation, and God's not angry at you for failing or angry at you for screwing it up, He'll go past that and give you what you need to get over. And in this next segment, we'll see some very specifics about what some of those elements of grace look like. Okay, so what have we said so far? Well, grace is unmerited favor. It means that God loves you just like you are. He accepts you just where you are. He accepts you with all your failures, in all your failures, and even before you started wanting His acceptance while you were even turning against Him. That's when you started this process. You are unconditionally loved. But He also wants you, I mean, you've heard the old saying, God loves us just like we are and loves us so much to not let us stay that way. Well, think about anybody that you love. If they're really, really struggling, of course you accept them where they are. But you don't want to stay in pain or stay in failure or stay in hard consequences or whatever. You want more for them. And that's what God's grace does. So when He brings that grace to us, just like the baby has to take in the milk, when He brings the grace to us, then we have to obey grace, take it in, receive it. So what does some of that look like? Well, in the story about the CEO of that organization, I said, well, structure came to him. The people would show up, so they were going for the run, and they would obey that structure and that discipline. When the support would come, and he'd get in a group and start to process these losses, that was grace and the care. And then what would he have to do? He have to obey that and begin to grieve and work through his pain and deal with his trauma. And then when the CEO coach came along and started showing him, the first thing you do is you set a vision, and then you got to get a team together, and then you got a strategy. Started working on all those skills. Then he took that in and he utilized it. Just like when you take in food, that's grace. What does your body do? It uses it and it grows. So, what are some of these areas of grace in wherever you may be needing to grow in next? Well, how about training? Maybe you need to perform something or get better. You need training. Maybe it's even in the area of addiction. You got to learn about addiction. Well, obey the grace of when a class is offered or when the AA sponsor comes, says, I'll take you to a meeting, right? That's grace. Go with them. Training. Somebody providing structure. Sometimes we don't have it in us to, maybe you gotta get out of debt. There's a structured class at your church in a Ramsey Financial Peace Group. Meets every Wednesday. That's a structure. You might not can do it on your own. They'll give you workbooks. Obey that structure. Okay? Feedback. Feedback is grace. When somebody loves us enough, will you sit down and tell me kind of what you see and how I can do better and be better? I ask for that from my mentors in life. It's a great act of grace. Then coaching. Tell me how to do it better. When I'm trying to become a better golfer, I got a coach that sits there and gives me grace. I take the club back like that. He says, no, take it back this way. That's grace. So we need coaching. Sometimes we need schooling, formal or informal. Relationship, support, energy. Need somebody to say, you can do it. That Navy SEAL is pushing his buddy up the hill, right? That energy of support, that accountability partner, that support partner, that buddy system, support and encouragement and guidance. This comes in a lot of different forms. Structured programs like recovery programs, Celebrate Recovery, AA, NA, SA, or grief groups, or financial programs like Financial Peace, for example, or Weight Watchers, or I'm not endorsing any I'm giving examples of a lot of good ones that have proven track records. Now, some people like one or fit one with one better than other, or just a therapist, a group. Maybe your marriage needs grace. That might look like the structure of a weekly marriage counseling session and a couples group that goes through a workbook on how to be a better husband or wife. Or maybe your parenting needs to get better. You're not reaching the standard. You feel like you're failing. God accepts you just like you are. But maybe you want to join a parenting class. Grace shows up in 1,000,000,000 different ways. One of my favorite verses. I love this verse. It's out of 1 Peter 4. And it's telling us to use our gifts with each other. He says, because when you love each other in this way, here's the phrase. It says that you are administering the grace of God in its various forms. My mother used to, for decades, till she died in her 90s, she used to tutor kids that had no parents and had no schooling really to speak of or enough. And she would go teach them how to read. That's administering the grace of God in its various forms. When you sit down and you're an accountant or good with finances and you sit down with a single parent who can't make it all work and help them get a budget and help them stick to it, that's administering the grace of God in its various forms. When you comfort somebody who's going through grief, when you train somebody, see, when we're serving each other with our gifts, that's administering the grace of God in its various forms. And God, there's a theological concept called universal grace. You know, it's kind of, there's universal, there's specific. Universal means that God, like he said, he makes the rains fall on the just and the unjust. Some people are saying thank you for it, but he gives grace to all of creation. And so there's 1,000 different various forms of this. Find the form that you need. Ask God to bring it to you. And then when it shows up, join it, obey it. And then from your loved position of not meeting the standard, you'll get to where you want to be and whatever that standard is. That's grace.
In a few words, describe the difference between legal grace and how the difference between those two orientations may change how you act in a specific situation. Keep in mind the idea that Henry explained, that grace doesn't mean we don't have any standards or requirements. What does the idea of unmerited favor mean to you in relationship to your faith? In what way do you experience the unmerited favor of God's grace? In what way is the unmerited favor of grace something that you can actively cultivate and put into place in your own life? Think structure, learning, relationship, energy, coaching, and feedback. What grace can you bring to others? What unmerited favor can you bring to empower someone that they cannot bring themselves?
Hey guys, welcome to the next segment in our path of faith. Now, when we talk about faith, we have all these kind of like things we're used to, like, love and forgiveness and grace and all this. And then we go over to, it seems like maybe not the faith path, but the psychology path, right? And we talk about boundaries. Well, is that really the psychology path? Not at all. That's a big part of the faith path as well. But when we do that, then people's minds kind of go because they go, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. What about grace? How can you have boundaries and grace? I mean, grace is like forgiveness and accepting everything and being unconditional in your love. And then you want to set boundaries and say somebody, you can't do that, or there are going to be consequences. Where's the grace in that? Kind of confusing, right? Well, it is if we think, here's the kicker, like the title of this, do boundaries negate grace? Well, it is confusing if we don't realize that boundaries are grace. Boundaries don't negate grace. Boundaries are an aspect of grace, because what is grace? Remember in the grace segment, if you've seen that lesson, we said that grace was unmerited favor. It means that God is for you. He's on your team. He's on your side. He wants the best for you out of his love. And when you have grace for someone in your life, you want the best for them, right? And it comes out of love. See, when you want the best for somebody, then you would do everything to help them get to that place. Well, here's the issue. There's no such thing as getting to a good place without boundaries. Because boundaries, if you go back to all the lessons on boundaries, boundaries are about self-control. Boundaries are about responsibility. Boundaries are about limits. Boundaries are about the capacity to say no to oneself and to others, and also to hear no and operate in freedom and not destroy your relationships with controlling behavior. So if you love someone and have grace for someone, the last thing that you would ever do is allow them to continue in destructive behavior that only leads to death. And some people, in trying to be graceful, will even give more and enable that behavior that is leading somebody to death. Now, it's not coming out of bad motives, it's coming out of a very loving heart. But here's the problem: love without boundaries turns into sick love that doesn't produce love in the end. For example, take a parent that doesn't have good boundaries with their kid. You've seen kids like this. They're out of control. They can't even sit in a chair long enough to do anything. They're impulsive. They're starting fights. Their friends don't like them. All of that. That's not loving. That doesn't accomplish the best thing for that child. I mean, simple example. You got a toddler. Does the fact that a parent would go to the curb and say, no, I'm not going to allow you to walk into the street, does that negate the grace that that parent has for that child? So we've got to get over this. One of the big problems, with, and I almost want to say the human mind, is in our imperfect, fallen, fear-based, and disconnected natures. We have sometimes lost the capacity to pull things together that look like they're opposed to each other in what's called a dynamic tension. Okay, it's two things that look like they're the opposite, but really both are true at the same time. And whenever we have one of them without the other, we lose something of the first one. See, what the Bible says is that the law, okay, that was boundaries by itself. Okay, the law basically said if you do this, you die. So it says the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth, or grace and boundaries, were realized through Jesus. So while the law said, remember the woman caught in adultery, the Pharisees came and said, the law says you must stone her to death. Jesus came in with grace and truth. The first thing he did was he said, well, if you guys are so perfect, you throw the first rock. Well, nobody's going to sign up for that, right? But then he said this to her, neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more. See, he didn't want a destructive future for her. Obviously, she's screwing up a lot of relationships. He didn't want that to continue. But he gave grace and he didn't condemn her, but he set the boundary and said, but I've got some expectations for you to live differently. And when I said love without expectations turns into sick love, think about somebody that enables somebody with substance abuse. And they never set limits and they keep nagging and they keep loving and being forgiving and all this kind of stuff, but they don't set boundaries and require change. That's when we're really loving somebody, when we're loving somebody enough to not allow them to continue to destroy themselves. Now, the other thing about boundaries and grace is that in the execution of boundaries, when we set limits with somebody, it's always done for them in love. I want the best for you. I love the verse. One of my favorite verses in Galatians 6, where it says, if you have a brother or sister, they're caught up in a trespass. It says and literally the word there is like a fish caught in a net. They can't get out. They're in an addiction. They're in a pattern of behavior, which we often condemn. Right? I can't believe such an addict, such an alcoholic, such a jerk, such a narcissist, such a this, such a that. We're sometimes so judgmental and so condemning. It's not the attitude that the God of grace takes. Nor does the God of grace say, have grace. Let him continue to use heroin. Or let him continue to drink 2 quarts a day. What it says in Galatians 6 is that if you see somebody caught in a trespass like that, that's destroying them, okay, go to such a one in a spirit of humility and gentleness. See, that's what an intervention is supposed to look like. That's what calling somebody and say, dude, I'm worried about you. See, that's setting a boundary, but it is the execution of grace because we love them and we're for them. I don't want my kids to not be able to function in life, so I'm going to have some boundaries. So they can internalize those boundaries and then they have them inside their head and they'll say no to themselves. But this idea that to set limits with somebody is a lack of grace, no, it's not. It's a lack of permissiveness. All the parenting research that's ever been done, has said, basically, that the healthy kids come from a combination of high warmth and high expectations. Warmth is grace, expectations are boundaries. Now, I don't mean unrealistic expectations, like, if you're not the valedictorian, I don't love you. It's crazy, but some parents are like that. Or just, I'll love you and let you get away with anything, and if you get in trouble at school, I'll go yell at the principal, how dare you discipline my kid, right? It's like enabling behavior. No. High warmth, high expectations, grace, and boundaries together. Now, we talked about how it's an expression of grace to, not let somebody continue in something destructive like section 6, for example. Well, boundaries can be on the other side too, where God also says, if somebody is doing something destructive to you, to set boundaries. Okay? Now, where does grace fit into that? Well, go to Matthew 18, for example. It says, if your brother sins against you, then you go to them and you set a boundary. You talk to them in private. That's the lowest intervention of a boundary that we can have is words. It's like your immune system has levels of intervention, right? It gets a bacteria, the antigen, the bacteria, the virus, it sins against you. It comes in. The lowest level of intervention is your saliva. It destroys it. It sees it, it names it, it destroys it. If it gets past that, then you have another level of boundary. The stomach acid and all of these digestive juices and everything, they'll attack it and not let it through. What does Matthew 18 say? It says, if they listen to you when you talk to them and the saliva, you solve the problem. It's over. But if they don't, it says, ramp it up a little bit. Now we're in the stomach acid. And then it says if they don't listen to a couple of, and by ramp it up, it says take take a couple of friends with you and talk to the person. Talk to them about how their drinking is affecting the family or whatever. Then it says if that doesn't work, do the larger group. Well, if it gets past on stomach acid, what happens? You know what happens in your immune system? The way God designed it, exactly like in everything else. In your immune system, it gets past the saliva, and it gets past the stomach acid. Then the system says, whoa, this is a bigger problem than our lower level interventions can fix. And it sends out a marker cell, and it names the bacteria. It names the antigen. In other words, it names the problem. It puts up a sign with the DNA code of that bacteria, so all the other cells in the immune system know, and then they come and they contain it. That's the bigger intervention. And then if they can't do away with it and shut it down there, then it's expelled from the system. And Matthew 18 says the next step is if they don't listen to the bigger group, then you have to separate from them. Cut it out. Now, in all of that, if somebody's in that kind of destructive, hurtful behavior, what an act of grace to try to stop them. But also, you're stopping the destruction that's happening to you as well. So you're setting limits, which is basically to promote goodness. It's going to go on both sides of the fence, right? You're saying, I'm not going to allow you to destroy me, but also in not allowing you to do something destructive to me, wow, that's good for you too. And I hope you listen. I hope you respond to the grace that we're giving in expressing this boundary. And the other beginning of grace altogether is that where does grace start? It doesn't really start with the steps towards getting better. It starts with the acceptance of the absence of condemnation for somebody where they are. So when somebody is actively doing something destructive, we're going to set a boundary. But the grace goes to them saying, I don't condemn you, I forgive you. Right now, even how you are, I accept you, I love you, I'm for you. And, not and I'm not going to allow myself to continue to be treated this way. But see, we're not angry and condemning and contemptuous. Some of the factors, by the way, that research has shown actually lead to divorce and conflict of marriage. When people set boundaries, they're doing it without grace. They're being judgmental and contemptuous and angry and all of that. So boundaries are never divorced from grace. Like Jesus, grace and truth are realized together. Every time you talk to him, you're not going to find wink, wink, I'll let that heroin go. No, you're going to find the absence of condemnation and total love and a little bit of heat. Look at that heroin problem. Because he loves you. He's not going to allow that to be okay. And see, what that does is begins to make us be aware, and that's the first beginning of getting in self-awareness, which is self-regulation and self-control. So when we are really integrated people, we're not really hating anyone, we're loving everyone, but we're not allowing evil to grow, whether it's in ourselves or in somebody else. That's not unloving at all. And some people think, like, to have grace means, well, I'm just not going to mention it. I'm going to give them grace on that. And, well, okay, there's moments for that, and sometimes that's the best thing to do in the service of a bigger. That's not the battle you want to fight. You're after something bigger. I mean, there's times we let certain things go because we're trying to, win somebody over with love. There's a lot of nuance to this, but it certainly doesn't mean that they're opposed to one another. And certainly it doesn't mean that we would allow destructive things to continue. One of my favorite passages, it puts the onus of responsibility on us as people of love to set limits. It's out of Leviticus 19, starts in about 15 through 17. And it says this, it says, do not pervert justice. Do not be partial to the needy, nor defer to the great and powerful. When do we lose our boundaries? Sometimes we lose our boundaries because I feel sorry for my kid. I'm not going to really require them to work that hard, or they've had a rough life, or whatever it is, and we don't require them to do things in responsibility that would make them stronger and better, or we don't, we don't set boundaries. We defer to the great and powerful. We're scared to speak truth to power, and then it says if you do that, then you get this. The next verse after that, it says instead, confront your neighbor frankly, your neighbor, somebody you love, you have a relationship with, confront them honestly, frankly, or you will share in their guilt. Really interesting. That when we're enabling a problem to go on, we're part of the problem. That's not love. But the absence of boundaries can make love unusable, and it can destroy love. How many marriages do we see where the love is destroyed because somebody's out of control? And the way to protect love would be to have the boundaries. So these things are not opposed to one another. And I'll end with another example about this. Now, I've talked about both sides of it. When you're setting limits with somebody to help them not destroy themselves, or when you're setting limits because they're sinning against you, and the Bible talks about both. But when it talks about both, remember the first act of grace? Turn the other cheek. It's interesting when Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, and he said this, he said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, right? And a tooth for a tooth. In other words, somebody hits you, you hit them back. He said, but I say to you, not that you hurt me, I hurt you back. He said, turn the other cheek. So what that does is it takes all of our relationships out of the realm of the absence of grace, which is punishment and law and getting back and justice only, right? You hit me, I'll pay you back equal to what you did to me. Grace says, no, unmerited. You don't have to earn my love. I'm going to give you my love, and I'm going to approach you with a new beginning. I'm going to turn the other cheek, and I'm going to make myself open and available to relationship with you, and I'm going to forgive you. See, that's grace. But every time Jesus offers us grace, he has the requirement of, I want to have a relationship with you, but you got to repent. See, I'm not going to, I can't allow you to continue to like that. Yes, unconditional. I love you. But what you're doing is not okay. And you never see him without one or the other. So don't give the law to people. Don't give boundaries without grace. But don't ever think that boundaries negate grace. Boundaries are one of the greatest expressions of grace that we can ever have. And one quick example I'll close with, because we talked about both sides setting limits to help people and also to protect ourselves, which would help them as well. It always used to, I mean, this is, I don't know why this is just so powerful, this example to me, when I used to see it over and over and over, because it just tugs at your heart when you're in this situation. One of the hard things about being a clinician, we used to direct hospital units actually, it's really hard to require things from people that are suffering. It's really hard. I mean, I can relate to that now. I just went through a knee replacement. When the physical therapist inflicts that pain, doesn't feel loving at the moment, but the next day I've gained more movement. The boundaries help. But I'll never forget these scenes back in my hospital days when somebody would check into a hospital. We check them in maybe the evening before, and they're so depressed, and then they would be suicidal, despairing of life. And many times they would check in, you see this relief. It's like, finally, I'm somewhere around, maybe somebody can help me. And there's this kind of like belief that they're going to check into the hospital and we're going to wave this magic wand and their depression's going to be gone. And that's true. Yeah, that's going to happen. But not the way they think it is. They go to bed one night. The next morning, about 6:30, okay, get out of bed. It's Nurse Ratchet at their door, banging on the door, saying, time to get up. You got to get to group. Breakfast is in 30 minutes. Go down and get your meds, and then check in for your chore assignment, and you got a meeting, and then you got to go group, and then they're giving this book, and then they got to get a group, and they get a group, and somebody says you got to talk. Well, but what? What? I thought this is where I was going to get grace. Well, you are. We love you enough to have some boundaries and some expectations. And then as they would begin to do the work that grace was requiring of them, that wish came true. They check out under the crust because they did the work of love, demanding the work that was going to help them. Boundaries and grace don't negate each other. They go together.
Love without boundaries turns into sick love that doesn't produce love in the end. Reflect on a situation from your life where a lack of boundaries wound up spoiling a relationship with someone you love or care about. Can you think of an example of a situation that you are currently experiencing, where setting limits and requiring change would enable you to have an ultimately healthier and more loving or caring relationship with someone else? Reflect on it and describe what changes you will make. What does it mean to you to approach someone with humility and gentleness in the context of healthy boundaries? Setting limits promotes goodness. What are some ways that you can set limits on someone's bad or destructive behavior towards you in a way that promotes goodness without condemnation? How does one turn the other cheek while maintaining their boundaries? Submit.